4 hours. In just 4 hours, the Mossdale Cave is going to be completely submerged by water because of a flood. John, Dave, Jeff, Michael, Colin, Bill, and 4 others are all about to enter the cave not knowing what's coming, all under 26 years old, 3 of them being only 17. They wanted to enter the cave to do some mapping, joking about how tight of a squeeze the cave is going to be and making plans for what they're going to do once they're done. It's June of 1967, and this is the Mossdale Cave tragedy. The 10 explorers enter the cave led by 26-year-old Dave Adamson and his friend Jeff. Dave knows Mossdale well, having explored it many times before. He warns the other cavers that this isn't going to be your typical cave. There's no big open spaces to stand in. Mostly, they're going to be crawling through narrow, muddy passages and pushing their way through tight spots. The cavers are all experienced and are all excited for the challenge. After a few hours, 4 of the group members, 2 men and 2 women, turn back as planned. One of them is Morag Forbes, Dave's fiance. She's excited about their upcoming wedding that's coming up in a month and doesn't know that this is going to be the last time she'll ever see her fiance alive. The way back isn't fun, but they've done it before and have no issues getting out. They exit the cave around 5 o'clock p.m., and since the others are going to take a while, they decide to head home and come back later. Dave, Jeff, and John press on, heading deeper into the cave, joined by the 3 other men. They're crawling through the far marathon passage, a stretch that's nearly 900 feet long. It's tight, barely wide enough for anyone to fit through, forcing you to crawl through it on your stomach, inch by inch, with no room to turn around. As they push forward, they don't realize something's changing. The water they've been walking through starts rising. At first, it's nothing to be concerned about, just a slight increase in flow. But the further they go, the higher the water levels rise, and eventually it catches their attention. They begin to question themselves. Is this safe? It looks like the water is rising more and more. After some reasoning, they decide to keep moving forward, since they're only 3 hours from the cave entrance. They're confident they can still make it out safely. Meanwhile, back at the entrance, Morag returns to check on the cave to see if anyone is out yet. But something's wrong. The closer she gets to the cave entrance, the more water she sees. And once she gets there, she's shocked to see the entrance completely flooded. There's a lake of water surrounding the cave, and it's completely blocked off. She runs to get help, panic setting in. She's terrified that her fiancé Dave and the others are trapped. Back underground, the men realize that something is wrong. There's much more water than they anticipated, and they decide that it's probably better to head back. As they make their way up the cave, the water begins rising faster and faster, and it's getting harder and harder to move. Dave, Jeff, John, and the others try to crawl through the narrow, tight tunnel, but now the water is rushing toward them. The flow is stronger than ever. Jeff knows the cave well, and he's familiar with how the water behaves, so he's trying to lead the group forward, but the water's coming faster than they can handle. It's rising past their knees, then their waists, and finally their chests. They try to find higher ground, but there's nowhere to go. It's becoming clear there's no way out. The cavers that are deepest in the cave begin to feel the water level rising more and more. They yell to each other, trying to warn one another of what is coming. John Ogden, who's likely the last one in the tunnel, hears his friends calling for him to turn back. He tries to, but the water is too high. He knows it's too late and begins to panic. He pushes himself through the tunnel, using his feet to move, trying to find any small space where he can get air. The frantic screams from his friends are ringing in his ears. Adrenaline begins to pump through his veins. The water begins rising faster and faster, and the yelling from his friends is getting more and more quiet. John knows that he only has a few moments before he would be fully submerged as well. John's instincts begin to kick in, and he tries to find anything he can squeeze into to get some final breaths of air. He moves quickly, trying to find any opening he can, and then he sees it, a small pocket of air. In a last-ditch effort, John wedges himself in a small crack he found overhead. The crack itself isn't large enough to typically fit a human, but John's survival instincts don't care. He needs to go anywhere that he can that has air. As he wedges himself further and further into the crack, he begins to feel his bones moving to accommodate the crack, until he can move no more. He lays there for a moment, stuck, wondering if this is the end, hoping that maybe the water would stop rising and he would eventually be saved. Things get quiet. He can no longer hear the frantic screams of his friends, and he knows that he is the only one left. Back at the entrance, rescuers are working as fast as they can to try to clear the blockage. Hundreds of volunteers are working to pump out the water and create an opening. They're hoping that they might be able to get enough water out of the cave for the cavers to be able to breathe, but it's not until the next afternoon that they finally get it all cleared. Rescuers call down the tunnel, hoping for a response, and in return, they hear nothing. So they journey down the tunnel to see if there's anyone they could find. And then they find it. Two bodies, Jeff and Michael. They had tried to lift their bodies into a small crack to get air, but it wasn't enough. One by one, the bodies of the other men are found, but there's no sign of John Ogden. After a few days of searching, John Ogden is finally found. His body had wedged so tightly into the small crack that it took a long time to find him. All 6 men had drowned in the rising floodwaters that filled the entire cave. After this tragedy, the Mossdale Cave was closed, and it remains the final resting place for these 6 men. In 1970, friends of the cavers returned to the cave to recover the bodies. They moved them to a safer, higher chamber, which they renamed the Sanctuary in honor of the men who lost their lives there. And the cave continues to be blocked off to this day.